in seminary, I took this public speaking class led by C.C. DeWolf, and she had us memorize this poem, A Ritual to Read to Each Other, and recite it to the class. It was the only piece she asked us to memorize, and we asked her, why this poem? And she said, you'll discover why. And it was an interesting poem. There's things there. There's a tension in it. And as I've moved into nearly 10 years in ministry, it'll be my 10-year ordination of ministry this coming November, I have appreciated the gift that she gave me. Because one thing that our ancestors used to have is a canon of wisdom within them. Almost none of them had something we would really call a library. A library for some of them would be about 2 shelves of books, and that was considered impressive. But they would contain within them this oral tradition, this wisdom of lines, often poetry, that they'd come to memorize, and that would accompany them through life held in the canon of their heart. And so this poem really became the first poem in my canon, my library of spiritual resources. And as I moved into ministry, I began to realize how often the lines came back to me. Particularly, they'd come back to me at times when I feel like something went sideways. Like I'd come out of a meeting and I just think, what on earth was that about? Or like, I thought we were all in the same place and we're not. Or just simply, ouch. And wouldn't you know, Professor DeWolf's poem would come back to me, and I would use it like a guiding thread, just something slender I could hook a finger on that I could pull against to guide me through the maze of what was happening. And so, for me, for these past 10 years, it has served as an important addendum to the covenants that we make, to the policies that we set, to the norms that we hold, that guide me back to a place of understanding. And so I want to take you through the poem today in hopes that you'll befriend it the way it has befriended me. And perhaps when some disappointment has happened, it will call you back. I tell people who go through our Pathway to Membership class with me that there will come a time when we disappoint you. It will happen. Some of you maybe have been disappointed like 3 or 4 or more times, right? And then when you choose to stay anyway, when you come back and promise again to be part of our covenantal promise remaking community, that's when this place is truly yours. And so I find this helps guide me back. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, exactly. Flat out, exclamation point, period, parentheses, repeat 100 times, parentheses, return again if you miss these important instructions. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, then we will fail to really understand the values and experiences that drive us to want to even come here in the first place. We won't understand the world that we're seeking for. We won't know how to truly welcome each other or the empathy we will surely need to offer. We might misconstrue something in a way that damages our relationship. And so it begins with this: coming to know each other. And this is why actually our small groups are so important. I hope that worship is thoughtful and thought-provoking and hopefully sometimes uplifting, certainly in the music. Thank you. But it is in a small group that you will truly get to be known and know one another. And so it is in those smaller settings where you have a chance to share that the work of community truly begins. A pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. A pattern that others made may prevail in the world. I also tell people in our introductory sessions, when asked, they ask things like, we're kind of surprised, given our values, that we are a super predominantly white congregation. Why is that? And I'll say, the truth is, churches or houses of faith are often pattern takers, not pattern makers. Everything in the world that exists, we bring in here and we replicate more. We take in those patterns of patriarchy and power and cruelty and hurry, and they just come in with us. And at our best, we're pattern makers. I'll come back to that in a little bit in another line in the poem. And following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. God seemed awfully powerful. But the poem points us to look at something beautiful, that's distant, but that could guide us. Let's think about what stars are, right? And how they're used. Sometimes it's like the North Star for us, a fixed point that helps us, like a compass, find one true course. That's always there. We could always find it. We know where to look. That's one type of star that might be our star. Or perhaps we're a star that dips below the horizon, that's only seen in certain seasons, or perhaps is only seen in another hemisphere. A star, in other words, that prompts us to go on a journey if we're going to find it and follow it, to a place that might be unfamiliar to us, but still we could find by being guided by that star. The star of our congregation is very, very simple and profound and distant, and I think more like the stars that dip towards other hemispheres. It's the beloved community. It's the place where you can truly belong, where there's justice and equity and mercy and love and belonging. True mutuality. But we may miss that star if we follow the wrong God home. Sometimes I hear people sharing what they think our congregation should be. We should be a spiritual sanctuary. Spiritual sanctuary is not enough if it's not creating other patterns, more true patterns of beloved community. Or we should be an organizing community going out to change society. Not that either. Some of us follow false gods of power or activism or just being a spiritual person and miss the powerful but fainter light of the star. For there is a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood storming out to play through the broken dike. The fragile sequence break. A sequence is a pattern that is trying to become. It's striving towards it. And if we're not careful, it might break before it becomes a pattern, the pattern we want to set for our world, our community here together. And why is that? These small betrayals of the mind that send with shouts these terrible errors of childhood storming out. Whew. I kind of wish actually it would break the beautiful cadence, but I wish they could add, if I don't know the kind of person I am. We all have these tender spots, these places of wounding that we carry with us from childhood. And childhood here isn't when you're a young child, like that beautiful childhood, right, where you play and storm and all that. It's any time in your life when you're in formation. And you know what? When we act out of those errors, they might have been ours, pain or harm that we caused, or harm that occurred to us, an error in our formation, and we react from that place and we go storming into community, oh, the chance of letting that fragile sequence break, right? We've forgotten what we've wanting to create and just rushed into it. And so when we have one of those small betrayals, and hopefully we can understand them as small, I always suggest turning to wonder. I wonder what was happening in my childhood that made me go into my storming place. I wonder what storms this other person carries in them, that was their response. In short, maybe I should know this person better, and they should know me as someone who could trust them with their history and truth. And as elephants parade, holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. Now, elephants don't just go around holding each other's tails all the time. That would be awkward. But they hold them during a storm. They catch on so they don't lose each other when times are tough. I see this in congregations too, right? Something brings out that child within our trauma self, some concern or worry, and do you know what we do? Someone storms through that gate, and we grab a tail, right? And go out with them. Do you know where I see this? On emails in particular, right? An email goes out, and someone's like, boom, and everyone's like, boom, 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 boom. We can slow down. You know, one of the things that I'm so appreciative of is our faith tells us that we have, this will come up in a moment in the poem, but we have an ability to have a wisdom within, a reasoning mind, an inner teacher that is perhaps what we should be holding on to in such moments instead of each other's tales. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs but not recognize the fact. You know, sometimes we harm one another, think each other is less than they are. There was a woman in my last congregation, and her name was Fran, and she was what I just call a dear soul. And Fran, her whole entire life was somehow viewed as less than she should be. She was a preemie, she was small, like under 4 pounds small. She was a little developmentally delayed and poor and in poor health most of her life. And no one, even her family, really thought much of her or expected much of her. You know, what I came to realize is she loved our congregation and was so dearly loyal to it. And other than the fact that one time she was the worship leader and fell asleep on the chancel and snored during my sermon, I thought she modeled what it meant to be in our community very, very well. And so at some point, we were talking, and I was like, you know, she's been a member here she's been coming since she was 6. She's been a member here for about 30 years. I think she qualifies to be on the board. And all these people were like, oh, no, she can't be on the board. Like, no, you don't want her on the board. And she did join the board. And she was one of the only members who always showed up on time, prepared, went and she was like a liaison to this other group, leadership group, always went, reported, did so great. And still people were like, Fran. And I was like, no, this is exactly right. And we were having a conversation about the kind of community we want it to be, right? What would our beloved community look like? And she just said, you know, I'm poor, right? I'm economically strapped. And I often hear comments here that would suggest that someone as poor am I'm not welcome here. And I thought, this is exactly why she's on the board. And I think there's a kind of cruelty in knowing that there are people that we're allowed to mistreat and not name when that's happening. There's a wonderful line from some old movie, I don't know, because I only heard this thing in NPR one day, and it said, you could always tell about someone's character, the nature of someone's character, by how they treat the people they're allowed to mistreat. And in every place I know, there's always someone you're kind of allowed to be a little rude to or dismissive of. And it is in our nature to understand that that is kind of the root of all cruelty. And so I appeal to her voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. This is basically a pay attention. Pay attention to what is happening. And not just to what is happening, but to that voice, to something shadowy. And for me, this is the inner teacher, one's conscience, the guide, the soul, the spark, the ethical compass, the human spirit. And it's sometimes in a shadowy place, right? There's a spiritual work called your shadow self. Those parts of you you would pretend didn't quite exist, and yet have sometimes gotten you through the most difficult of times. What does that person have to say to you in moments when you're most challenged? For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. My dear ones, we need to be willing to share. To share in a way that brings ourselves forward and invites others to come forward too. To find a way, even when we disappoint each other, or the root of all errors have occurred, that we can lean in and stay engaged, perceive what is happening, to say yes when we can say a blessed yes, and to say no when we're protecting something holy, and to say maybe we could find a way. Because I'll tell you, that darkness, that's the darkness when we lose our star, when we no longer even know what is guiding us forward, inspiring us, calling us home. May we find the inspiration and the guiding thread to guide us back to our true selves and to one another and to beloved community. May it be so, and amen.